Two things. One is next week we start a series that looks like it's going to be a 4-week series. And without trying to underplay it or overplay it too much, I would say if you were ever going to invite somebody to church, the next 4 weeks would be the time to do it. You've heard me mention Rich Mullins, late great singer-songwriter of Christian music. Rich did an album, a 2-album set back in 1991 and 92, I think, that he called The World as Best I Remember It. And that title has always stuck with me because I like the notion that it's not just here's the history of the world, but here's the way I remember, here's the way I see it, here's the way I approach it. So we're going to do 4 weeks of kind of like TED Talks, if you know TED Talks. We're going to do 4 weeks of here are things I want you to know. Here are things that I want you to focus on. So they would be great weeks to invite somebody who might be a seeker, who's not necessarily listening to get hit over the head with the Bible, but just hear some good sound approach to life. So the next 4 weeks, I would highly encourage you to bring people to church. But today, you guys voted. I have to admit, I told you before, usually I'm wrong on which one you would pick. For the first time, waited till the very end, but I nailed this one. You guys picked David. So we're going to close this series looking at David. So my name is David. I am the youngest of 8 boys. Can you imagine? Can you imagine my poor mom? 8 boys. My mom's name was Nitsevet, and my dad, if you're not sure, he was Jesse of Bethlehem. Yes, I'm from Bethlehem, and that's an important piece of my larger history. Frankly, over the years of my life, I had many titles. King David, warrior of great renown, poet, musician, writer, conqueror. I was described with words like righteous and effective. And I was also described with words like selfish and vindictive. And if I'm entirely honest, they probably all are appropriate. I was the second king of Israel. God was Israel's king. But they looked around them and they saw that the other nations had human kings. And they wanted to be like everybody else. So they said to God, we want a king. And God said, you have a king. No, we want a human king. And God said, okay, be careful what you ask for. I am the second of the human kings of the United Kingdom of Israel. I reigned from 1000 BC to about 970 BC, about 30 years. Saul was the very first king of Israel. And he started out okay, but God got angry with Saul. Because Saul started offering up burnt offerings in direct defiance to what God was calling him to do. He continued to do it, and later Saul also disobeyed God regarding a battle that the people had with the Amalekites. Our people had taken treasury from the Amalekites when they defeated them, and God had ordered Saul to have all of it destroyed. He didn't do that. He kept some of it. God was not happy with that, and finally God had seen enough of Saul as the first king of Israel. And so God sent the prophet Samuel off to find me as a boy and quietly anoint me to be the future king of Israel. Now, meanwhile, 2 things happened that are important to my story. First, I was called to Saul's court. I was called to the king's court to be one of many royal armor bearers. And they found out that I could sing and play the lyre, so they also had me do that to soothe Saul when he was a little worked up. That's one thing that happened. The other thing that happened was a war broke out between the Israelites and the Philistines. Of course, that's the story that most people know about me. We all know that the Philistine champion was a giant named Goliath, that he lumbered out to the head of his people and he announced that we should send our champion out to face him, their champion. One-on-one combat, single combat, winner take all. Nobody wanted to face Goliath. Meanwhile, I had been all sent out to the battlefront by my dad. I was bringing supplies and food and provisions to my brothers who were fighting. And I watched this unfold. And I saw that no one would stand up for our people. I decided I would. So I announced to anybody who would listen that I could beat the giant. Of course, everybody laughed at this kid, this uppity kid. But I persisted, and the king finally agreed. I'm sure he thought I would be killed instantly. He did offer me the royal armor, but I refused. Frankly, not only did I not think I needed it, it was really too big anyway. So armed with a sling and a stone, I faced Goliath on the field of battle, and I won the day. And an important thing I carried away from that day was I never felt that rock was too small to hit it. I never felt that the rock was too small to hit him. I was always convinced that he was too big to miss. That was the approach I took, and that carried me through my life. Well, Saul, King Saul, saw what happened, and he was so taken by my bravery that he appointed me the head of his army. Unheard of. And the people loved me because of my bravery, and I grew in popularity. But my popularity began to scare Saul. He went from being my greatest champion to being terrified of me. Bothered him so much, in fact, that he developed a plot to have me killed. Fortunately for me, one of his sons was named Jonathan. And Jonathan was one of my best friends, and he couldn't stand the thought of me being killed. So he quietly came to me and told me about his dad's plan. He warned me about his dad. So I ran. And I ended up in a city called Keilah. And I hid there, but Saul found me. He sent out people looking for me, and he found me. And he began to make plans to come and lay siege to the city of Keilah so that he could capture me and take me back. So once again, I ran. This time I ran up into the mountains and hid. I got word to Jonathan where I was, and so Jonathan came and met with me secretly, there where I was hiding in the mountains. And he once again reconfirmed his loyalty to me as the future king of Israel. But Saul was determined, and once again, he found out where I was. And so once again, he planned on coming up into the mountains and capturing me and bringing me back. And it was at that moment that God intervened. And in case you're thinking, how do you know it was God? Why wasn't it just whimsy? It had to be God. It had to be God because there is no other explanation for what happened next. Saul was traveling through the mountains looking for me, and he stopped. He saw a cave. And he went into the cave. And let's just say he went into the cave to answer nature's call. So there's King Saul, totally unaware that my men and I were hiding in the back of that very same cave. There he is with his back to me, doing what nature calls you to do, completely unaware that I'm there, completely vulnerable. The man that was hunting me, wanting me dead, was right there within my reach. And I could have so easily killed him. But I didn't. Something told me not to. What I did instead was I snuck up behind him. And I secretly cut off a little corner of his robe without him knowing it. And then I snuck back into the shadows with my men. Now you might hear that part of the story and might be thinking, why would you do that? That seems like the worst. Where does that get you? Well, after Saul left, I followed him out of the cave. And I called to him, and I showed him the fabric in my hand. And my point was, I wanted him to see just how easily I could have killed him, just how easily I was right there at him. But I didn't. And so the question is, why? Why didn't I kill him when I had the chance to spare my own life? I didn't want any harm to come to King Saul. I didn't see Saul as my enemy. I wanted him to continue to live. I honored him. And because of that, he and I reconciled right there right there outside that cave, and he officially recognized me as his successor to the throne. And so you think about all the stories of my life, and boy, there are a lot of them. You think of all of them and you think, why this one? Why would you bother to stop and tell this one? It's not that exciting. There are no giants and slingshots. There are no inspiring anointing of God. There are no seedy relational intrigue, no convoluted murder plots. I mean, in the end, it's a story about a guy hiding in the back of a cave. It's really not a very inspiring story. So again, why? Why tell it? Well, the reason this story stands out is not because it's chock full of intrigue and scandal and drama. Instead, it stands out to me because there are some words that I attach to this story that have come to mean something special to me. Words that on the surface really aren't very exciting. They're really not even all that intriguing, but they're words that if you take them to heart and apply them, they can be life-changing. And the words are reconciliation, reunion, restoration, words like that. I had a relationship with King Saul. We weren't best buddies. I was just one of many armor bearers. He was the king and I was not. And yet we had a relationship. And for me, that relationship was built on the fact that as king, as my king, he deserved my respect and my loyalty. Because the Bible says that we're supposed to have confidence in our leaders and submit to their authority, because they keep watch over us as those who must give an account. And then the Bible goes on to encourage us to do this so that their work will be joy and not a burden. Because it says that wouldn't benefit us at all. And so you think about that and you process it and you say, okay, does that mean that I'm supposed to simply like everything that somebody does? Am I supposed to just grin and bear it, turn the other cheek, thank you, sir, may I have another? No. Doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean that we're called to seek reconciliation, regardless of what anybody else does. Because as I crouched in the back of that cave in the dark, cowering there, my first instinct was to draw my sword and just end it. That was my human instinct, and I could have so easily done it. I could have stopped running, I could have won the day, and I could have taken the throne that I was preordained to sit on. And frankly, nobody would have faulted me. Probably they would have thrown a party for me. I mean, it's kill or be killed, survival of the fittest, strike first, revenge is a dish best served cold, right? But you can couch all this with any snappy euphemism that you want. It's not how God calls us to be. And so there in the darkness of that cave, I fought every human instinct I had. Oh, I'll admit my hand closed around the hilt of the sword. And I'll admit that I was well aware that it was all right there within my reach. But it was God who kept whispering in my ear, there's another way. There's a better way. Slowly, as I crouched there in the dark, he encouraged me to relax my grip, to slow my breathing, and to think this through. To think. Because if I had done anything to let Saul know that I was there in the cave while he was in the cave, the only possible outcome of that scenario was death. Either his or mine. Had he known I was in that cave, somebody would have died that day. And yet I couldn't let this instant pass. Because I knew deep down in my heart, somehow I knew this was a watershed event for me. I knew that what I did over the next few seconds was going to define who I was moving forward from this day. And that's when it hit me, there in the dark. The way to set things right, the way to show my sincerity, to show my faithfulness, and so quietly, I crept up out of the shadows. I snuck up. I'm sure my men who were crouched back there with me were sure I was going to kill him. I'm sure they were hoping, wishing, praying, encouraging that I would kill him, especially when they saw my hand go to my sword and draw it out. But instead, I simply cut off that little scrap of fabric. Proof that I had been well within striking distance. And just as silently, I crept back to the shadows and waited. You can imagine when I got back there, my men were shocked. I had to make them be quiet. They couldn't imagine why I had wasted such a golden opportunity. But I stayed there completely silent until Saul left the cave. And then and only then did I get up and I followed him out, and at the mouth of the cave I called to him. And he whirled around, shocked that I was there, and of course he instantly drew his sword. But again, fought my human instinct, and I refused to respond in kind. Instead, I showed my empty hands, save for the one scrap of fabric off his robe. And then I explained to him what had just happened, how easily I could have killed him, and how I intentionally did not, because I wished no harm on him. Now, I'd love to say that I was so brave at that moment, but I'm not going to lie. I was terrified as I stood there unarmed with my hands up, because I had no way of knowing how that was going to end. But it didn't change the fact that I knew it was the right thing to do. And the truth is, the right thing to do isn't always the easy thing to do. I took a huge leap of faith that day, and God so honored my faithfulness. So my question to you today is, who do you need to reconcile with? Who do you need to reconcile with? Who is it that you avoid when you see them coming? Who is it that you sit at home and stew over? Who is it that you try to stay as far away from as you possibly can? You know, late at night when the house is quiet and darkness surrounds you, who is it that you lay there in the darkness and try not to hate? And we all know we're not supposed to hate, because we're good Christians. But we're also imperfect humans. So who is it that you hate? Whoever it is, here's my advice. Stop it. Stop it. Stop hating. Stop holding that grudge. Stop letting those emotions consume who you are. Because those emotions are horrible for your health. They're horrible. And the odds are astronomical that the person you hold a grudge against doesn't even care anyway. In fact, a lot of times they don't even know that you're mad at them. Either way, my experience is they're sleeping just fine at night. Meanwhile, you are popping Tums like they're candy, trying to fight all that acid in your stomach and in your soul. And you toss and you turn all night long, dreaming of ways to get back at them. And you spend way too much energy on something that isn't helping you one little bit. So stop. Stop. Now, am I so naive as to think that when I offer the olive branch of peace to that person, they will automatically accept it? That everything will suddenly be hunky-dory, that we'll all sit around the campfire and hold hands and sing a rousing chorus of Kumbaya? Not even a little bit. But you know what? You can't control what they do. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about what they do. Pray about what they do, but let it go. Instead, worry about what you do. And the release and the peace that you are looking for, it will come. Now, the truth is, there's an awful lot more to my story. Awful lot more to my story. Some of the things in my story I'm quite proud of, to be honest. Other parts, not so much. Because if you look at my life, I made some really bad choices. And frankly, some of them I paid dearly for. But what stands out as I look back over my life, what stands out in the midst of the good, the bad, and the ugly of my life, is that God always stood by me. And because of that, there's something I struggle with. And here it is. I struggle to understand why God chose me. God chose me. God chose me. From early in our history, the Hebrew prophets described me as an ancestor to the Messiah. I was in the lineage that would lead to the coming Messiah. And then the New Testament lists me very specifically as an ancestor directly to Jesus. Me, this little shepherd boy with a sling and some rocks and a giant and some harps and some songs. And Jesus is part of the house of David. How amazing is that? God chose me. But you know what? God chose you too. Maybe He didn't choose you to be the king of Israel, but God chose you for something particular and something special. God chose you for just such a time as this. And frankly, you have no hope of living up fully to the calling of God if you refuse to let go of the hate and the anger. Because those kind of emotions are huge walls that you simply can't get over. They keep you from a more complete relationship with God. You can never be who God is calling you to be until you let go. But here's a warning. If you're brave enough and you're willing enough to let go of those things, watch out. Watch out, because God has great plans for you. And once you let go and grab a hold of that train, there is no stepping off. It's a wild ride from that moment forward. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. I have experience. One last thought. One last thought. I started by sharing some of the many titles and names that I earned over the years. And I shared that they are as many as they are varied. And yet, despite all of those descriptive names, despite all of those powerful titles, there is one that I hold most dear. And it doesn't speak at all to power or privilege or prestige or fortune or fame. Instead, it speaks to who I truly want to be remembered as. And that title is a man after God's own heart. Would you pray with me? Father God, I thank you for the life of David.